Arsenal's problem wasn't losing, it was winning. Every trophy race Mikel Arteta got closer to meant one more year of Champions League football he couldn't afford to miss, and one more reason to spend money Arsène Wenger never would have touched. This is the story of how the most disciplined club in the Premier League became one of the biggest spenders in world football, and why they didn't have a choice. For nearly 2 decades, Arsenal fans knew exactly what kind of club they were watching. Cautious, patient, almost stubbornly principled. While their rivals splashed hundreds of millions on marquee signings, Arsenal built teenagers into internationals and quietly banked the profit. It was a philosophy. Some called it genius, others called it fear. But by 2024, that club was gone. In its place stood a version of Arsenal that had spent over £1 billion in 5 years, chasing a trophy their old model was never built to win. So what actually happened? And more importantly, did Arsenal have a choice? To understand what Arteta destroyed, you have to understand what Wenger built. Picture a small business owner who refuses to take out a loan, even when that loan could triple his profits. No debt, no risk, no £80 million gambles on a striker who might not work out. That was Wenger's Arsenal, and the numbers back it up. For 13 years, from 2000 to 2013, Arsenal's record signing sat at around £15 million. Andre Arshavin, Sylvain Wiltord. Modest names by today's standards. Meanwhile, Chelsea and Manchester City were writing checks like it was monopoly money, hoovering up the world's best players regardless of price. Arsenal simply didn't play that game. Their net spend most seasons hovered near zero. Sometimes it was actually positive, because Wenger kept selling his best players for profit. Fabregas, Van Persie, Nasri. Sold high, reinvested low, repeat. For years, football pundits called this the Wenger way, a philosophy of ethics over excess, of building players rather than buying them. But here's the twist almost nobody talks about. It wasn't really about ethics, it was about survival. In 2006, Arsenal moved into the Emirates Stadium, a £390 million construction project. And that mortgage didn't pay itself. Every transfer profit, every wage cap, every principled decision not to spend big was quietly funneled toward paying down stadium debt. Wenger wasn't just building a football philosophy, he was running a bank. And the bank had one job: don't go under. It worked. Arsenal survived. But by the time the stadium debt was finally cleared in the mid-2000s, something had shifted in English football. And Arsenal were about to find out just how expensive that shift would be. Here's where the story gets interesting. Because this isn't really a story about a manager choosing to spend money. It's a story about a manager getting trapped by his own success. Think of the Champions League like a subscription service, except this one costs you over £100 million a year in revenue if you're not subscribed. Prize money, broadcast rights, matchday income, sponsorship value. It all multiplies the moment you're in that competition, and it evaporates the moment you're not. When Arteta took over in December 2019, Arsenal were just outside the Champions League. They were nowhere near it. So the early rebuild wasn't really about ambition, it was about damage control. But then something happened that nobody fully planned for. It started working. Arsenal climbed the table. 2022 to 23, a genuine title race. 2023 to 24, another one. Suddenly, Arsenal weren't just competing for Champions League football, they were competing to actually win the league. And that's the trap. Because climbing the table doesn't relieve financial pressure, it multiplies it.
The closer Arsenal got to a title, the bigger the squad needed to be to sustain a challenge on multiple fronts. League, Champions League, cup competitions, all at once. The better their league position, the higher the wage demands from players who now had leverage. The more Champions League football they played, the more they needed a squad actually capable of competing with Europe's elite, not just surviving it. Success didn't buy Arsenal breathing room. It bought them a bigger bill. This is the part of the story most fans miss. Arsenal weren't spending because they'd abandoned discipline. They were spending because staying disciplined would have meant staying still. And standing still, in the financial superpower era of the Premier League, isn't neutral. It's falling behind. So Arsenal spent.
And they didn't spend cautiously, they spent like a club that had thrown out the old rulebook entirely. Since December 2019, Arsenal's gross transfer spend has hit approximately £1.28 billion. Their net spend, what they've spent minus what they've recouped in sales, sits above £750 million. That's the second highest net spend in the entire Premier League since Arteta arrived, trailing only Chelsea's now infamous spending spree. To put that in perspective, this is a club that, for 13 straight years under Wenger, refused to break a £15 million transfer record. Arteta broke that mentality almost immediately and never looked back. Think of it like upgrading from a bicycle to a Formula One car in the middle of a race. Declan Rice arriving for £105 million wasn't a luxury purchase. It was an admission that academy graduates and value signings simply couldn't compete anymore against clubs backed by nation-states and billionaire ownership groups. And it wasn't just Rice. Arsenal broke their transfer record repeatedly under Arteta, each time essentially declaring that the Wenger cap no longer applied. The message was clear. If Manchester City and Chelsea were going to spend without limits, Arsenal weren't going to lose a title race on principle. But here's the irony sitting underneath all of this. The more Arsenal spent to catch up to the financial superpowers, the more they started to resemble exactly the kind of club Wenger spent a decade refusing to become. Wenger built Arsenal's identity around restraint. Arteta rebuilt it around the belief that restraint, in this era of football, is just a slower way of losing. Here's the uncomfortable part of this story. The part that doesn't get resolved with a trophy. Because Arsenal's entire spending model since 2019 only works under one condition. They have to keep qualifying for the Champions League. Every single year. No exceptions. Think of profit and sustainability rules, PSR, like a strict calorie count enforced on every club in the league. Spend too much relative to what you actually earn, and the punishment is real. Points deductions, transfer bans. In extreme cases, a genuine relegation battle triggered not by results on the pitch, but by numbers on a spreadsheet. Just ask Everton fans how that feels. Arsenal haven't broken those rules, but they're operating close enough to the line that the entire financial structure depends on Champions League revenue continuing to flow in, year after year, without interruption. Miss the top four for even one season, one bad run of form, one injury crisis, one managerial misstep, and the model Arteta built doesn't just wobble, it cracks. The wages Arsenal are committed to, the transfer fees still being amortized on the books, the squad size required to compete on multiple fronts. None of that disappears just because the Champions League revenue does. This is the tightrope Arsenal are walking right now, whether fans want to admit it or not. Wenger's caution kept Arsenal financially untouchable, but trophyless, and increasingly irrelevant in the actual title race. Arteta's ambition brought Arsenal back into contention for the first time in nearly 2 decades. But it also means the club is now gambling with stakes Wenger spent his entire tenure refusing to touch. So which version of Arsenal actually got it right? The manager who protected the club at the cost of glory, or the one chasing glory at the cost of long-term security? Maybe there isn't a clean answer. Maybe in the financial superpower era of the Premier League, staying ethical and staying competitive were never both possible at the same time. Let me know in the comments. Was killing the Wenger standard the price Arsenal had to pay to become champions again? Or is this the beginning of a financial reckoning nobody's ready for? If you want more deep dives into the numbers behind football's biggest clubs, subscribe, because this is just the beginning of the story.